I want to share with you two things that I've seen when I've been to Chuck's co-housing in Nevada. I was walking about and I saw on on the door on the other side of your cluster, there was a sign, "Welcome home, welcome to our community." And the story behind it, there's a couple that have been trying to adopt two, I think, Colombian kids, orphans, and it took them a process of about 5-6 years. And the time that I've been there, that was the time that the kids were finally, got home. So I've never seen anywhere else, welcome to our community. So that gives a sense of belonging. And another story was when I've been to N Street co-housing in Davis. There was a little Chinese American girl, and she was an adopted kid. And the sad thing was that her adopting mom, got cancer and passed away when I think the girl was about 4 or 5. And Kevin, the founder member of the community, actually adopted the girl. And if you can just imagine what would happen, in a different situation to that girl, to find another home, another place, rather than stay in her community that she actually grew up. So these are only two stories from possibly much more than, how to live in a community makes so much difference. And that's about it. So we'll give the floor to you to ask any questions. And of course, thank you for coming in.
Might just get everyone to grab a seat at the front, or not everyone, the speakers. Go. Do you want to try yelling out?
I'm curious what the communities that you work with, when you go in, when you're approached by a community, do people all generally know one another, or are they just people of like mind that have found one another?
Well, two things. They don't know each other, for sure. I mean, other than a couple of families that have started a new co-housing community. In fact, actually, we just finished a project in Mountain View, California, where they started out with 7 households who did know each other, but as soon as they bought a property, that was down to 2 households. So that's typical, basically. We were 34 houses, nobody knew each other. That's typical, because they were moving into a place where cooperating with their neighbor was the idea, and although I have a lot of wonderful friends, if they're not interested in doing that, I'm not interested in them living in my co-housing community, because that simply makes life work a lot easier if they are. And second of all, I've never met any two people that I thought were like-minded, to tell you the truth. I don't know where that notion comes from, basically, and they're certainly not like-minded. They're, the story about co-housers, like other cultures, 2 people have 10 opinions, and that's certainly the truth. And they do things by consensus, so they do have to learn to listen to each other and appreciate each other. But over and over again, what happens is it doesn't take long before you realize that the basic co-housing math, which is 1 + 1 = 3. I have an idea, you have an idea, and together we come up with a third idea that's better. And when you see that in practice over and over again, you get more wedded to the notion that, you know what, we're gonna do something smarter if we talk about it a little bit. We meet once a month. It takes us about 2.5 hours a month to manage the farm, but we get a lot out of it that way. It's interesting. Somebody asked me the other day, why is there 12 co-housing communities in Seattle? And it's one bookstore in Seattle has sold 550 copies of that book, Co-Housing. And the bookstore also has a little notice that says, if you're interested in co-housing, call this number. There's been a couple of people organizing them, but generally speaking, it's a new number up there, project after project. It's very basic grassroots organizing, but that's where it starts, basically. People getting very motivated and figuring out the basics of grassroots organizing.
Nicole?
So this might be for all of you or one of you. I've lived in communities, so at the moment I'm living in four of us in a unit, and 2 of the neighbours got along really, really well, and then had a falling out. So anytime you engage or you live with lots of people, or even 3 people, how do you deal with those when there is a falling out or there's a big disagreement, especially when you're designing the future of their dreams and such? How do you deal with that for any of you?
That's what you need a process, and in any community, and specifically in co-housing, when you start with people that doesn't know each other, you need to create a method, a governing of sort of thing, consensus or anything to manage those meetings and all the fallouts that might happen. And this is a skill that you learn, and that's an important thing. This is part of the process, Go for an NVC, nonviolent communication. Bring someone and do a workshop. Find kind of a governing method, consensus or sociocracy.
We're dealing it through numbers,
Yep.
by having enough people there so that you can avoid people if you need to. And we think that that's one of the solutions.
I think what Stina means is there's always going to be, well, at times you're always going to find a toxic community member or someone you don't get on with.
Thank you.
But tomorrow they're not toxic. People change their minds. You disagree on certain topics. My neighbour Martin, I disagree with him on how he parks his cars, but I love him for everything else. So I don't hate him overall. I tolerate one thing about him, but it's that tolerance that builds up in a community, and that's why the critical number. I think the Chuck's co-housing book says 15 to 30 homes, and from my experience, 20 to 50 will work. So it's the critical number. If you don't have enough people, you find that you fall out and you can't get away from the person you had an argument with yesterday. If you have too many, it's like you don't know everyone. So there's a magic number sitting in the middle.
Yeah, I've lived in co-housing in the last 25 years now, and in 3 different communities, 1 in Europe, 2 in the U.S. And it's a reoccurring question. Of course, if we can't get along, if it doesn't work socially, why bother? That's that's the point. And as Stina and others have mentioned, yes, we take workshops from time to time, but we also find out through somewhat empirically that some people are sort of cut out for it and some people aren't. So for example, when we started this project right here, there was a woman who was like 25 years old, didn't make very much money, like $25,000 a year, but she was saying things that were wiser than average over and over, and people were listening to her. This poor guy right here, he's a lawyer who made about $300 an hour, and he would say things, and people, and they weren't resonating, and it didn't make sense, and he sort of figured out on his own, maybe this isn't for me. So, for me, it always comes back to a thorough process, because there people figure out themselves whether it makes sense to them, or even more importantly, if they can learn, and particularly learn to listen. Listening to their neighbors, for example. I contend that the thing that makes the management of our community the easiest is that since I have to cook dinner once a month, and I often cook with a different person. I always cook with a different person, one person after another. And I notice that meeting after meeting, I might think that what Tony is talking about right now is really malarkey, but since I cooked with him last week, I'm going to give his notion the benefit of the doubt. And sort of starting to appreciate people to the point that you give them the benefit of the doubt and you learn to listen better all the time. As I grow older living in co-housing, I feel like my skills around listening are increasing more rapidly than all the other skills I have. And it's an acquired skill. It's not something you come to the table with, especially when, like for myself, when you own your own business, you're sure you always know how you should proceed, or you're a school teacher, you're always lecturing others. There's so many jobs in our world that are very hierarchical. You're a nurse and you're always taking orders from somebody, you name it. So getting into the mode of, we're all here together, we're all managing the ranch together, and what do you think? What do you think? For example, let's do it this, okay? Let's consensus. That's a skill.
I bet your catering skills have improved a bit as well.
They
Hi. I wanted to ask a bit about the, process and governance. So, Ben, it seems like your model perhaps is a bit evolved from the earlier concept of how co-housing looks and works. And operates. Can you maybe, because I found your presentation awesome, but also very quick, and I didn't catch all of the details, yeah. So perhaps can you expand upon the financial background and also the governance? And you mentioned there wasn't the formal strata situation that others might use.
So I suppose what I've found through my co-housing experience of 3 years and an eco-village experience of 10, and I haven't been there the whole time, but I found people in community need a process, and they need to agree that process from day one. But people will also come through the community, and there'll be turnover, and it's about orientating and educating those people as they come through. Oh, this is how we do this, and and it's not for everyone, and that's fine. So what I've done is, I suppose, with Rolf developed this model where we just want to go and get it done. I've seen lots of co-housing communities and eco-villages attempt to get started. Friends of Friends, down in Canberra, the ACT Greens, members of the ACT Greens started one up. Environmental groups often start them up, and it's Friends of Friends and they grow. You might have we had about 15 core members and people fluctuating in and out. But I don't know, Chuck, if this has been your experience, but I think about 80% of co-housing communities in the States, once they buy the land, they actually happen. Prior to that, it's a lot of mucking around, and it can generally take between probably 2 to 4 years from my experience. So I want to move more quickly than that, and I think we can. And the prices in Sydney of land are pretty steep, so it takes an astute person to be able to get in there, get a bit of land off market, which we're looking at, and then make it happen. So it's not for the faint-hearted. So I think I've taken the step of doing that professionally and setting up a development company to do that. But I also want it to be an operational company as well. It's going to be there forever. Sorry, was there another question about governance, or I suppose how would it be governed? Let's say you're living there right now and you want to change the colour of the common house and you want to change it from white to green. St Patrick's Day. Ben and O'Callaghan, I reckon. No, the way we would do that is we'd sit down, and this would be our monthly meeting, and we'd talk about what colour we wanted it to be. And co-housing, or there's some tricks to actually not voting ever on things and actually just doing it by consensus, or at least basing it on that. But I found the consensus decision-making process often takes too long. And if you've got to make an urgent decision and you've got to fix your sewer system or something like that, don't try and do it by consensus. It'll take a week and everyone will be having to go somewhere else to, So, that's just been my experience. So,
and I would the only improvement I would make on that is that with any of the co-housing projects that we design or live in, that I've lived in, we never do things that are subjective by consensus. The color, I've never seen that done in a group successfully. We always hire somebody to pick the colors, based on maybe a 5-word criteria at most, but we just live with it, because you want to set a co-housing group or any community up for failure, get them baited by a bunch of subjective questions, and it's the person who stays up till 2 o'clock in the morning emailing ad nauseum about why it should be this or that would carry the day, and that's simply a way of tyrannizing a group, accidentally, really. So there's thousands, and like 99% of the questions are very objective, and the group can make them, no doubt, very, very intelligently. But subjective things I try to avoid. Pets. I'm never in the room when the group talks about pets.
We ruled that out at the Eco Village in Currumbin because we're back onto bush. The council suggested, and we agreed, that there would be no dogs or cats allowed in the community. So the number one issue in body corporates is around pets. So we've avoided that one. You can have any other pet you want. There's some goats. Lots of kangaroos.
Hello, over here. Ignore the pregnant lady. I have a couple of questions. One is, how can people still move into Currumbin?
Yes, absolutely. It's freehold title. You can move in and out. I've actually taken 3,000 people through my house in the Eco Village over the last 6 years.
Cool.
Getting a bit tired of that, but if you go onto the website, theecovillage.com.au, you can just go there and come up to the Gold Coast and go for a tour.
Oh, I meant to live in.
Oh, yeah. There's probably only 6 lots left for sale, but there's about 30% of them are rented, so there's always rentals coming through. A lot of people come in actually, what's been really interesting, people come in and they say, I want to buy in, but I want to live there first for 6 months or a year. And that's great, a great way to test it out. And if it's not for you, that's okay. But about 80% of people end up living there. They get so involved in the community and have so many friends that they can't
And that's been
really
the
leave.
importance, if you have a common house, then people can stay for, a week in one of the guest rooms and experience the community. If you don't have it, then...
Yeah, we don't have guest rooms at the Eco Village in Currumbin, and I wish we did.
Yeah.
There's meant to be a B&B there, but it hasn't been finished.
Oh.
I should also mention that if you have a baby in the Eco Village at Currumbin, you get 2 weeks of meals, dinners for free on your doorstep. You can't say no, yeah, they just rock up for free. So I'm having another one in July because I like that.
I was there last year in July, and I wanted to woof there, but I couldn't find how.
Oh, right.
Anyway, so
I
Chuck,
can help you out, yeah.
okay, cool. Chuck, I wanted to ask you, if we go to the States, can we live in a co-house? Are there ever any places available?
Yeah, I mean, we don't do Airbnbs in our co-housing community. We do have 2 guest rooms, and people often stay there, I guess.
I stayed in the house.
Gilo stay there. Sure, I mean, it's an individual basis. There's no organization choreographs that. There's 160 projects. I'm sure if you got the word out, somebody's gone for summer vacation or something for weeks or months. We have 2 guest rooms, and whenever Katie and I are out of town, our house is also available. So that's typical. So
Cool. I had an idea. What about having a co-housing app?
Well, the funny thing is, I hear this question a lot. And I want to be honest about it because, we have a tour in our co-housing community once a month. One Saturday morning a month, there's a tour. Because, in this quote-unquote village-like setting, like if I go to common dinner and there's a bunch of strangers sitting at a table, I will always avoid that table. Because I'm there to get a deeper, more meaningful relationship with these 94 other people that I'm, growing into another kind of a relationship with. I'm not there to talk about, now how many common dinners do you guys have a month, and how do you set up the guest rooms, and whatever, the cursory stuff. And I do hear a lot of the co-housers talk about how, it's so nice when we don't have strangers at common dinner. I don't want to sound unwelcoming, but what I would do is like when I went to Denmark for the second time for what turned out to be 13 months, I started writing those guys letters a year in advance, and I wrote a lot of letters a year in advance, and to the point where when I went to visit one, they knew I was coming. They actually knew who I was. They knew my name, and they knew my interests, and the letter had gotten around, and the familiarity had gotten pretty thoroughly around. So if you do visit, I recommend that. It's not a project, it's not a zoo, and it's nicer if you're already sort of spent some genuine interest in being a part of a community that you plan to live in. Oh, forever, sure. That you probably can go to cohousing.org and see where there's houses for sale in various co-housing communities. That, if there's a house for sale, go to town for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, my question actually relates to that. How do you prevent, if you've gone in with people and you've made these connections, how do you prevent the gentrification that we have where, I love that place, I want to go there, and then the next, and all the value's gone up, and then you've got, all of a sudden, this is not the kind of place that I thought, or perhaps they could bring different values to, and how do you keep,
They do morph a little bit, but, I'll just tell you, the people that have, did all this heavy lifting and all the heavy lifting that's associated with that, this project had, numerous public hearings. The 3 projects before it had been declined, so we had a, uphill battle from the officials. When a group has gone through that, they love new energy. For all the other subsequent issues regarding managing the ranch, basically. Of course, it pays, here we're making something that reflects who this culture is, so it very much pays to, to come in knowing what that culture is. So they come to a couple common dinners, they come to a couple work days, they come to a couple meetings, they see how we manage the ranch. However, that said, historically, they've been very familiar with the community for years and have wanted to live there. We're probably on our 100-person waiting list when we first got built. And, finally a unit came up for sale. So, and they tend to be very good co-housers. I'll just say we've had 4 deaths in our co-housing community. So we've had, a lot of new blood, and that new blood has been a blessing, frankly. Oh, the prices have gone up. And that is a downside of for-sale co-housing, because you walk onto a co-housing community and it's palpable. This is housing with goods in it, as the Danes would say. So unfortunately, even during the recession, when housing went down precipitously, the co-housing kept its value. That actually caused some turnover, because some people lost their jobs. They had a lot of value in their house. They sold their house, went and bought a house that was twice as big and half as expensive somewhere else, because those houses precipitously declined in value, because there's not much value there other than keeping rain off your head. Here, there was a ton of value, and that was obvious. And so those prices didn't go down. There are co-housing projects in the U.S. that manage their appreciation. There are some in Australia. There's co-housing cooperative in Tasmania, an incredibly pleasant place. I spent a couple days there a couple weeks ago, and their prices are very reasonable, like $500 to $1,000 a month of rent. But consequently, because their prices are so low, they actually do an immense amount of vetting of new residents. I was very amazed by how thoroughly they really wanted to know that you came to play co-housing, basically. People often ask me, Chuck, what's the common denominator amongst people who move into co-housing? In my experience, the common denominator, there's only one, and that is that individuals believe that their life will be more easy, more convenient, more practical, more economical, more healthy, if they give cooperation with their neighbor the benefit of the doubt. That's it. In other words, we had a guy recently who walked around and knocked on everybody's door and said, hey, I'm going to buy a pickup truck. You want to buy it together? And everybody went, no, no, no. And so we didn't. But the idea that he did that, he knew that that was a possibility. In a regular suburban setting, I think it'd be about 10 minutes before a police car showed up under those circumstances. And we have had 2 shared cars over the years, and we have a lot of other things that people have floated, and so nothing's absurd. Float it if you want. And so anyway, those are the people that move in for the most part.
I'm interested in inner urban vertical villages, and I'm wondering if there are, all of these examples are on fairly large bits of land, not in the city. If you're interested in doing this in an inner urban location, are there any good examples? And I can understand that from a planning and zoning perspective it could be an absolutely diabolical nightmare, but I'm just wondering if there can be some discussion or insight into what's involved.
Yeah, about 5 out of the 6 of the last projects we've done were very inner urban. We just finished a 31-unit project in downtown Vancouver. And it was 3 houses, and the group bought the site and turned it into 31 houses on less than a quarter of a hectare. That's actually a very common solution now. 5 stories, 4 or 5 stories, for buzzing through these. You're going to get the movie version. But I'm trying to show you an inner urban project. And, the process is still the same, even though you'd be surprised. It's obviously easier to be more cultural and more anthropological if you're designing. Whoops. Let me see, whoops. This is a very urban project. This is 4 stories actually on, less than a half of, or like a third of a hectare. This is interesting because these people moved from property. They had lots of acreage individually, but when they had the conversation about where they wanted to live, it was an arcology, if you will, one building that embraced the south in that hemisphere, and embraced the people. That's a metaphor that comes over and over again, even in the context of dense projects. This one here is in Boulder, fairly dense, and this one right here is in brand new one in Mountain View, California. This one was complicated because our neighbors doing their projects at the same time were Google, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So the city thought that everybody had nothing but money. And so this was a very, a somewhat dense project, 4 stories in that interurban setting. So still, you can go in there. It's almost like a beehive in a way, but you figure out how, she had moved from a single family, how she actually started this project. This is the one that started with 7 friends and ended up with 2 households moving in and lots of not like-minded people. And it turns out the least like-minded people were the friends. But anyway, that's another story. Anyway, yes, they're very doable. And there's 10-story co-housing in Sweden, which is one of the countries that has as much co-housing as the others almost.
And in Australia, if you go to Christie Walk, it's not a co-housing, it's inspired co-housing development. It's pretty much inner city. If you go to Murundaka co-housing in Melbourne, that's in Heidelberg. So it's suburban, but it's still an urban environment. It's not rural. Newtown. No.
Is this there?
I mentioned we're looking at a site just outside Newtown. Yes.
Coming soon.
We're focusing also on high density and the high.
So that's also a building. It's a bit different. Well, Stina is, the last phase. So it's a higher.
There's certainly
high
advantages
density
to it. You're going to save a bit on construction, although the disadvantages are you don't have as much roof, you don't have much garden space on ground. So you're thinking maybe then garden roofs and things like that, which can be more expensive. So there's,
I expect in the
might just keep moving on to the questions because there's quite a few hands.
Okay, I just want to say, I expect in the future there's going to be some co-housing group there's a 30-story building under construction, and you talk to the landowner, and you just buy 3 stories and turn it into a co-housing. I expect that to be in our future, collective future.
Yeah, thanks very much for the talk. That really leads pretty nicely into my question. Chuck, you said that culture was the thing. That was the key, and I think it really is. What I take you to mean from that is that it's the culture of that community itself. I'm interested in the broader city because we're all citizens as well, and we live in, let's face it, a fairly materialist, capitalist society. I'm interested to know whether, although I personally wouldn't mind not having a ladder, a lawnmower, or sharing a car and all those other things, whether you see it as a disruptive force for the city broadly, or whether in the way that you framed it, Chuck, it's a smart choice and this is a common sense thing. So you see it more as an organic, growing nature in the changing pattern of our city habitation, or is it a disruptive force to a dominant force?
No,
in
it's a really good question, actually. Sometimes I feel guilty because, we got 94 of the coolest people in the whole county live in one little ghetto, basically. And you wonder, how much these other neighborhoods might be suffering as a result. We've taken all the cool people and put them in a ghetto. But the reality is, living there, for example, they're very active people in the local neighborhood. There's a whole bunch of them that are working on homeless issues, a whole bunch of them that are working on political issues. I wish I could scream through these slides faster, but actually it's not in here. Whoops, I lost control. It won't work. Anyway, do you know how to make this thing go backwards to that? Did it? No, it's not doing it. Thank you, Igor. Spasibo.
Spasiba.
He's from Russia. From Russia with love. Back to that cultural question, and I thought where you were going with that is, what do we do? Also, what do we do about the fact that we, don't necessarily even know how to live in a village anymore? That's been called from our culture. That slide that I was showing you there, that's the Emeryville co-housing that I lived in next to San Francisco. Not one person in that photo was born in the USA. They were all born outside of the USA. They had actually moved from towns and villages elsewhere. Thank you, sir. that were much more obviously a culture, and that knew how to cooperate, for example. You know, we just did a little project in downtown Tokyo, and 25 people came to the original workshop, the Getting It Built workshop. 19 of them were from small villages around Tokyo. Tokyo's 27 million. Only 6 people came from Tokyo. 19 came from villages who were living now in Tokyo, but also now wanted to live in a village-like setting in the quite anonymous 27 million Tokyo. So there is a big, far-reaching experience culturally, but in that case of Tokyo, I couldn't help but imagine how cast adrift those folks were, and how it wasn't going to take long before community was culled from their existence as well. So in fact, this is something they wanted to sustain in their existence and not lose it, especially for their kids. They grew up in Muras, which is a village with about 100 to 200 people, and they wanted that experience for their kids as well. So it does have far-reaching cultural questions. It's worth thinking about. I would argue that where I live, there's so much support for people's extra co-housing activities that it's a net benefit, a huge net benefit. I think it'd be fun if somebody did that study at some point to prove that or not prove that.
Can I just get a show of hands who still has a question? 'Cause I think there's a few. Cool.
We'll take a few at a time.
Time
2,
check.
3 in them.
Yeah, we're what, 25 past 8?
You wanna go for it?
Well, we've got, I think we can stick around. I said 8:30, but we can probably stick around for a little bit longer if...
Shall we go for another 15 minutes? Is that all right with everyone?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, look,
Well,
pause there.
anyone
If
who
you
would
need
like
run
to
out,
sneak off, feel free. But
we won't be offended.
if you guys are happy to stick around, then that's
Go
great.
for it.
Okay, so
Who's
the question up the back.
Oh, I've got the mic.
Yeah. 15 minutes.
There's always one. There's always one. Oh. He is desperate. Question up the back.
Hi guys, I'll make it quick. I'm loving hearing about all the case studies internationally and across Australia, but I'm really interested in hearing what the opportunities are in the here and now. Listening to Ben and hearing that you're looking at sites in Newtown is incredibly exciting. I didn't understand, we were whipping through so quickly, your model, and I'd really like to take that as a takeaway. What I got was that you've set up a development arm and that you're potentially looking at long-term leasing models, which is a little bit of a try before you buy formula, is that right? Or are you looking for equity? Can people come in and put skin in the game now and be part of the growth and the organic development that we've just been hearing about Chuck say is such an important part of the personal investment that you're making?
I'll try and answer all those questions. So, yes, we are talking to some big investors at the moment to kickstart the company. The company's been around for about 10 months now, after about a decade of research, but yeah, finally taken off. There is a holding company called Smarter Villages, and each village will be a real estate trust under that. Yes, you can buy individually into that real estate trust if you want, but it's not essential. The priority is to get people in there and living there and creating community. And we want to help develop that. So yeah, you can just go in there and rent for $350 a week, $600 a week, depending on what you want, a 1, 2, 3, 4 bedroom apartment unit. And they are in urban only, so we're only going to develop these near city centres.
Okay, so just coming, sorry. So
Yeah,
back
sorry,
in-
I missed one of those questions.
Yeah, so if you were looking at wanting to participate in the actual development, you said you've got a holding company as a development arm, but if you wanted to, if you were making a positive choice to put equity into something that was had better social benefit, was a functioning
Impact
community,
positive development, yeah.
impact moving, absolutely,
The super
impact
funds,
investment.
as soon as we do one, the super funds will be all over it, and we're going to do another 4 or 5 around Australia, then go overseas. That's the plan. I mean, there's so much
Awesome.
demand. We've got 800 people through our website who are interested in this. So demand won't be a problem for the next 10 years for any sort of co-housing or eco-village. I think in Australia we've just got to develop them.
Fantastic.
And
Well, you
show
can
the
count me
world
as
the way forward. I mean,
801.
Europe, 45% of homes in Germany are rented. It's very hard to get someone out of a rental in Germany because of the way the rules are set up. We're bringing that, hopefully, that European model to Australia. So you don't have to move every 12 months or have the threat of having to move if you're a renter. So yeah, trying to twist it on its head a bit. Not overly new, but it's new for Australia.
Yeah, I guess it is.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, in one sense, we're having owner participation so that people It's like buying a house between two people. One person wants to live in it and the other just wants to be an investor. So the person who's living in it just pays for the part of, or the proportion of the house that they're not owning. And our model is just like a whole lot of investors and a whole lot of owners, or you know, it's a structure that has a company and you're buying shares in the company, and all of the people who are residents have to have shares within that company. So those shares give them a return, and that comes off their rent, so to speak. But they can buy more and more shares until their rent is more or less nullified by their shareholding. And so if a person was downsizing, for instance, came in from a larger home, they could buy more shares than what they needed for the amount of space that they wanted to occupy. They could then reduce the amount of space. Say if one of the partners died, they could reduce the amount of space they required. Their rent would go down, so they end up with more income. And or if they wanted to liquidate some shares for a car, like we've got a lot of old people who are asset rich and cash flow short, so we could end up sort of saying, okay, well, sell a few shares and you can buy yourself a new car. So our one is very flexible in and out with shareholding.
Hi, my name is Joanne Gallagher, and this is my partner Peter Orell. We did a master's degree in leadership towards sustainability in Sweden, near Malmö in Denmark. And our thesis was on eco-villages. Since I've moved to Australia, I went and lived in Albany, Western Australia, and there's a project in Denmark called Deco Housing. We're members of that project. 12 houses, ranging from 80 square metre 2-bedroom to 120 square metre 4-bedroom. They want to have a spread of demographic, have families there and seniors and something in between. We were the sort of in between. No children, and I'm 46, and Pete's 50. The price of the houses ranged from 360,000 to 450,000 to get in. You had to have, the question is, how do you make that financially viable when they're looking for young people who don't have that kind of money? We fell into that trap. We didn't have the independence to get into it. Now I hear there's a leasing model, but we were thinking about rent-to-buy models, other types of financing. Can you give other suggestions so that people like us can get into that?
We've got somebody here who's been in real estate for quite a while who's pretty cluey in that sort of line. He's a part of our team from... you want to just answer to some of that, Greg?
Sure. No, that's a really good question. That was the thing that we looked at, was trying to make this kind of housing accessible to everybody, and to not miss out on the opportunities that you usually get from home ownership of accumulating and acquiring assets, and something that's an asset for yourself as you go through your life. That's what we structured our model around, was the idea that people who first of all struggle to get home loans and so forth, either they don't have sufficient deposit or income, to make a property that's essentially like owning a home, but without having to get a mortgage or qualify for a mortgage. That was part of the idea of our company structure and the shareholdings. And I won't go into how all the numbers work with that, but you can sort of ask us about it. We can send information to you. But that was the general idea of our structure, was to first of all democratise the development. So the people who live there are shareholders in the development, rather than just owners of the end product. That was part of it. And the other thing was to give people an opportunity who didn't want to live there to invest in the development and then own part of the end product, that allowed other people to live there as somewhere to put their money into a project that was sustainable socially, environmentally, and economically. Because we've talked a lot about, if it's not socially sustainable, then it's nowhere. If it's not economically sustainable, it's nowhere either.
And so people come in for as little as $10,000, and we're looking at smaller apartments now, and possibly coming in for less than that.
Stina, I think, when we look at the financial model of Ben and yours, you see that in the end it came from people who lived in a community and wanted to get out the regular home ownership. So you got to be creative if you really want to live a bit differently. It can be applied to anything, but you got to be able to move things and search for things in order to really make it happen. Because if you rely on the regular system, you won't be able to afford mostly.
To make it more affordable, is my mic on?
Yeah.
Smaller spaces, as mentioned. So in lots of co-housing communities, they have smaller homes and rooms, and especially smaller kitchens. Why? Because if you want to have 6 or 8 or 10 people over for dinner, you just go down to the common house and you book that out for 3 hours one night. So you've got that shared space, you're already paying for it, you might as well use it. So we often do that in the eco-village, but there's other synergies. The sharing is a big one. So yeah, not everyone has a lawnmower at the eco-village in Currumbin. We share all sorts of things, computers, printers, yeah, so the sharing and making things smaller, cheaper, going up instead of out. Yeah, there's various ways to make it cheaper.
It's also the idea of you can reduce the marketing costs, which is often like 10% of any development goes towards marketing. But if you already have the group of people there who are going to move in, you don't have to send flyers out to everybody in the 5K radius of the development or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah, and less developer profit removed.
And Matt, I want to say one small thing about that, because you can imagine just about every project we do, affordability is right up there. I mean, it's like sustainability, affordability, and often it's affordability, sustainability. But so what we do at the very first workshop is we have everybody go talk to a bank and find out what they can afford. And then we work backwards from that. I mean, we did Berkeley co-housing at the time. The average house in Berkeley was $500,000. And we had, that project was started by 4 single mothers who could afford $120,000 each. That project I showed earlier in Oklahoma, they had to afford houses for $150,000. Now, those might sound low for, I'm sure they're very low for Sydney. But basically start there. In Vancouver, we had a lot of folks who didn't have a lot of money, so we ended up doing a lot of shared houses. But these houses were designed custom from the beginning to be, you have your own bathroom, you have your own bedrooms, you have a little, ensuite, and that works out better in co-housing because a lot of things happen in the common house, so you don't feel like you're on top of each other in the same way. But getting very creative, and this is where this whole there's a nexus between the architecture and the affordability. We get these very aggressive mortgage brokers that help young families figure out not only what they can afford, but how can they afford a lot more? And they say, oh, you go to the, you won't believe what they tell these young people. I'm always amazed. You go to the movie every month? Well, now you're going to the movie every 4 months. Or you have a car, now you're selling your car until you get in, and then you get equity. The first project we did in the US, 23 out of 26 were first-time home buyers. And it came down to very aggressive mortgage brokers that set these people up for success. You haven't talked to your aunt in Florida for 6 years? Write her a birthday card right away. I don't care when her birthday was.
How do things start in the States work here? How do people come together and get the money?
Yeah.
Buy the book.
Can I get the first step and the most important step to starting a co-housing or sustainable community?
The first 2 steps?
The first step and the most important step.
If I lived in Sydney and I wanted to get co-housing started in Sydney, I know what I'd do because I did it in San Francisco. I would go to every bookstore and I say, get the book. And, take a little news release. There's tons of news releases right now about Vancouver because they're moving in this weekend. So if you Google it, you find, tons of great little stories about it. And then you have to treat the culture, basically. You're not going to go talk to 5 of your friends and talk them into it. That just doesn't work from a numbers point of view. You get it broadly understood in the broader culture, and you have it, the interest percolate up. That's the first thing I do. The other thing I do is, host a Getting It Built workshop or public presentations like this, but I would do that long after you get the book out there.
And that's how I started. I started with an ad that I put in a few places in the mountains. Got a group, the Mid-Mountain Co-housing, and there's a land now. Hopefully they'll develop this year. So, it starts with one person. And yeah, in the Blue Mountains. Yeah. In Hazelbrook, yeah.
An ad?
I just, did some graphics, put it everywhere that I could, and people came, and some people got caught, and we have a development. So.
Or a website. We did ours by website.
Yeah.
No advertising ever.
So we started with the real estate. We went the other way.
We started with the development itself and then told people about it, and it's full now. So that's the way we went about it. I'm with Stina's group. So this is the Sun Villages project just on the border of the ACT.
Stina and her husband, basically, you know, eventually. Yeah.
It's been an evolving. Most of those people aren't going to be residents, but the vast bulk of the people living there are people that we just started talking to people about what we were doing, and they said, "Yeah, that sounds great," and they spoke to their friends.
Ben, anything to add?
Educate yourself about co-housing. There's heaps of resources online, and go and talk to someone who's done it before and get some assistance.
Fantastic. All right, I think we better wrap it up now. I just want to say thank you to all the speakers tonight. I found it really interesting. We do have a recording which we will share at some stage once we've processed it and everything. To share it, I've set up a group on Facebook which I'll just send to everybody who's bought it or registered, and you can join if you're interested in kind of continuing the conversation. If not, ignore. Or otherwise, we'll make sure there's information about all the speakers and their projects distributed as well through everybody's email. Finally, I'd just like to say thank you to Mims Ros, who have been filming for us tonight. And if you're interested, check out their documentary, which is being released imminently or has just been released, called Pulse of the Desert, and it's about these two French guys, a Colombian musician, travelling to the heart of Australia to explore Indigenous Australian music at a big desert reggae festival. It's really interesting. A few of us,
Igor, our tech support, don't
and
forget
Igor,
him.
our tech support, who has been very patient, very helpful.